Good afternoon. Hope you're having a good day. Reading and watching the news lately has been overwhelming. Devastating hurricanes in Texas and Florida and other places, Putin's 2.5 year grinding war with Ukraine, and their recent incursion into the cursed region of Russia, ongoing fighting between Israel and Hamas that has reduced much of Gaza to rubble after Hamas's brutal invasion and hostage taking. The threat of both of those conflicts widening to regional or global war. All of it makes me wonder, why does God allow such evil and suffering in the world? As we've continued reading all the way through God's Word with the One Year Chronological Bible plan, we've been walking with God's chosen people through the most devastating times they experienced: the fall of Jerusalem and the exile to Babylon. The exile happened 1,000 years after God called Abraham and Sarah to go to a land he would show them. Their great-grandson Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt by his brothers. Joseph ended up unjustly put in prison, but then was lifted up and made second in command of all of Egypt. He directed them to save up grain over 7 years of bumper crops so that there would be plenty in the next 7 years of famine. Eventually, he brought his whole family to Egypt and took care of them. But after Joseph died, another Pharaoh enslaved them, and they were slaves for 400 years. But God heard their cries and sent Moses and Aaron and 10 plagues so that Pharaoh would finally let them go. God opened up a way through the Red Sea and then closed it over the pursuing Egyptian army. God made a covenant with the people at Mount Sinai, led the people through the wilderness right up to the promised land. But the Israelites were scared of the people and wanted to go back to Egypt. They ended up wandering the wilderness for 40 years until that whole generation died, including Moses. Then Joshua led the people across the Jordan River into the promised land. The people had great expectations of swift victory and idyllic life in a land flowing with milk and honey. But instead, their rebellion against God resulted in centuries of injustice, idolatry, and violence. The country split into Israel in the north and Judah in the south, and they constantly warred against each other and their neighbors. God allowed Assyria to conquer Israel and then raised up Babylon to conquer Judah and Jerusalem. So much of their history has gone from being at home to being in exile, and being back home, and then being in exile. And every time that they were in exile, the people wondered, why is this happening? Where is God? Like them, we have deep questions about why God allows such terrible evil in our lives, in our world. The Bible doesn't give us a simplistic answer to our questions. It tells a story. In Genesis, God appointed humans in his image to rule creation on his behalf, in a partnership with him. We have immense potential, but are often short-sighted, selfish, and violent. God takes us and our decisions seriously. He handed Israel over to the consequences of their decisions. 2 Kings 25, which we started today and will read in the rest of the coming days, describes the fall of Jerusalem. King Zedekiah rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar after paying tribute to him for decades. The Babylonian army surrounded Jerusalem and laid siege to it for 2 years, just as the prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel had warned. The people of Jerusalem experienced horrible famine and despair. The Babylonians finally broke through the city wall. King Zedekiah and the army fled, but they were captured. Zedekiah's sons were killed in front of him, and then his eyes were gouged out. The Babylonians looted and destroyed the temple, burned the city, and carried off most of the people into exile. The few people who were left behind killed the man who had been put in charge of them and then fled to Egypt. By the end of the book, we're left wondering, What was God doing about all this, or through all this? Suddenly, at the very end of 2 Kings, the new king of Babylon lifted up Jehoiachin, Zedekiah's relative who had been taken into exile before Jerusalem was destroyed. He released Jehoiachin from prison, gave him a seat of honor and a regular allowance of food from his own table. And that's how the book ends. Why did the writer of the story choose to end it that way? We're left hanging, wondering what happened next. To understand the ending of 2 Kings, we have to go all the way back to Genesis 3. Adam and Eve were living in their home, Eden, but they fell away from God's purposes and plans for them. But God did not leave them just to their own devices. God promised that he would send a Messiah from Adam and Eve's descendants, a new deliverer who would crush the head of the snake. Later on, one of their descendants, Joseph, saved the lives of his family and all of Egypt. Later on from there, Moses delivered the people from slavery and led them through the wilderness. So Jehoiachin, in the exile, was like a new Joseph until God returned his people to Jerusalem. He was raised up, honored, and given plenty of food. In the New Testament, John the Baptist served like a new Moses, calling people to follow God. He baptized Jesus, who shares the same name, Yeshua, as Joshua, who led the people into the promised land. The Bible doesn't give us a simplistic answer to our suffering. It tells a story that leads to Jesus. He showed us God's love by suffering for us and with us. His life, death, and resurrection opened up a new future, a new way back home to God. In Romans 8, the Apostle Paul describes how we can respond to the suffering we experience. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hopes that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We are waiting for all of creation to be restored and renewed. We're waiting for God to set things right and to make this place our home for all of eternity. Paul's words in Romans 8 ask the question, will we be part of the solution? Will we imitate Jesus' love and participate in his kingdom mission? In the description of this post, I'll give you a link to an excellent podcast and study questions on 2 Kings 25 from the Bible Project. I especially love the question, what is one step you can take this week to join God's plan of restoration for your community? Our communities are in desperate need of hope and restoration. You and I are called to be part of the solution. Have a great week. See you again soon.